Literally. I had a folded paper.
I had a folded paper and I lost it because my name is C Twist and I lose my mind.
Here it is.
Lose my mind right where I left it. All right, well, let's get started. Welcome to the Now podcast, Making Moves in Real Estate, our episode number 20. Mm-hmm. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Crawford, a distinguished psychologist with a master's degree and a PhD in psychology from the University of Houston. Dr. Crawford is a licensed psychologist, the author of 8 insightful books, and a seasoned organizational consultant. With over 30 years of experience, he has delivered more than 3,500 presentations to prestigious organizations such as Sprint, Shell, and so on and so forth, nationally and internationally. His expertise has reached millions through 2 PBS specials on stress and communication, and he has been cited in leading publications like the New York Times, Entrepreneur, Investors Business Daily, and more. So, please join Courtney and myself in welcoming Dr. Crawford.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
That's quite the introduction. You've got a lot on your resume, Dr. Crawford.
Well, I've been doing it for a while, you better have something to say after you've been doing it for 30, 40 years, so there you go.
Yeah. So I had the pleasure of meeting you a few months back at our Vistage meeting, because you're a Vistage speaker, the CEO group that I'm in. And I remember coming back and just telling Michelle how amazing you were. It's just your whole topic of this life from top of mind philosophy. It really resonated with me. And I was wondering if we could start with that, since that seems to be like the whole premise behind all your books and your YouTube channel.
Yeah. So after I got my PhD, I said, okay, Bill, you've learned a lot of cool stuff, but how can you say it in a way that, number one, isn't just what everybody else is saying, and is also tied to science? And there was a course I took when I was getting my PhD called the behavioral, the basics of behavior, and it talked about how really everything we think and feel and do and say has to do with how the brain processes information. And what I like to do is break the brain down into 3 parts. The brain's very complex, but people spend their life studying the brain. But in order for us to really understand kind of how and why we find ourselves reacting to certain situations or certain people, talk about the lower brain's called the brainstem. That's the part down there. Middle brain's called the limbic system. That's kind of the middle part. And the upper 80% of the brain that I call the top of the mind is the neocortex. What's fascinating is this middle brain, the limbic system, is the part of the brain that gets information first. And it acts as a scanner, a processor, and a router. And unfortunately, it's not very smart, and it's working with old software. So it has a tendency to misunderstand almost anything or anyone negative as dangerous, and throws us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. And that's where we get stressed, angry, frustrated, annoyed, depressed, resistant, all that kind of stuff. But if we can kind of recognize it's this middle brain interpreting some negative person or situation in a way that's triggering certain chemicals that really kind of make us feel that way, then it's no longer, man, this person really makes me mad, or this situation really frustrates me, because often we can't go out and change that person or that situation. So I've created a system that I call Life from the Top of the Mind, wrote a book about it. It's kind of what my YouTube channel is all about, what my presentations are all about. And I show people how the brain works. And then I give them a 5-step model for when they find themselves feeling stressed or angry or frustrated or whatever. How do you shift from this reactive brain to the more responsive brain, what I call the clear, confident, creative brain, the top of the mind? So there's a 5-step model that shows people how to do that. Then I give them another set of material about, okay, now that we know how to get to this clear, confident, creative part of who we are, how do we stay there? How do we go into new situations in the future and not be triggered by difficult people and difficult situations? Then, which might be really meaningful to your audience, I show people how to deal with resistant people who are stuck in what's called the resistant brain. How do you get them to shift from the resistant brain to the receptive brain so you can create a true solution-focused conversation with them? And that's the system. It's a 3-part system. I get to go around the world teaching it. I call it getting paid to do what I would pay to do.
That's a lot.
Can you tell why I was impressed?
Yeah.
And we had the pleasure of a whole half-day session with him, so
Yeah.
we really got to work through it.
Yeah.
Which was amazing.
Can we talk about the 5 steps? Is that
Sure.
Oh, can we do that?
Sure. The first thing you want to do whenever we find ourselves feeling stressed, frustrated, angry, annoyed, again, we want to recognize, okay, wait a minute. It's not the situation that's making me feel that way. It's my middle brain triggering certain chemicals, and that's why I feel that way. But we're still down there. We still feel that way. So the first thing is to have this upper 80% of the brain that I call the top of the mind literally regain control from the lower brain. Now, the lower brain normally controls 2 things, breathing and muscle tension. So anytime you've done yoga or meditation or mindfulness or Tai Chi or any of that, breathing is always part of the process. But very few people ever tell you why. The reason you start with breathing is in order to have this upper 80% of the brain literally begin to regain control from the lower brain. So I encourage people to use the 4-4-4 method. It's what the Navy SEALs use to refocus. Inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and say the word relax on the exhale. The reason you want to say the word relax on the exhale is that the lower brain normally controls muscle tension. But when you're breathing and counting and saying the word relax on the exhale, you now have the upper 80% of the brain begin to regain control by literally taking over 2 functions normally controlled by the lower brain. Now, most systems talk about that. Take a deep breath, relax, you'll feel better. And you do feel a little bit better, but it doesn't really get you to your best. It just has you feeling maybe a little less stressed or a little less anxious. So I don't stop there, I just start there. Once people have taken these 2 steps, then I say, okay, now you want to ask yourselves what I call top of the mind questions. Because when you're stuck in the brainstem, we are asking what I call BS or brainstem questions, which is simply what's wrong with these people or what's wrong with me. But anytime we're asking those questions, those are brainstem questions. So the questions I encourage people to ask is, okay, I'm feeling stressed, angry, frustrated. Am I doing that on purpose? Did I choose to do that? Well, probably not. Number 2, how's it working for me? Is this helping me produce the results I want? Probably not. Number 3, and this goes a little bit deeper, is this the way I want to be defined? Do I want to define myself as someone who reacts to difficult people and difficult situations with stress, anger, frustration, resentment? And number 4, which may be more powerful than all 3 put together, is would I teach or recommend this reaction to my child, my children, or someone I love? So most people go, wait a minute, I'm not feeling this on purpose. It's not working for me. It's certainly not how I want to be defined. And no, I would never teach or recommend someone I love be anxious, stressed, frustrated, annoyed. So say, all right, now we know what we don't want. Let's use those same questions to get really clear about what we do want. If I were dealing with this difficult person, difficult situation in a way that's purposeful, in a way that I believe is effective, in a way that defines me, makes the statement I want to make about who I am, and in a way I would teach or recommend to someone I love, how would I be thinking and feeling differently? So when I'm doing my seminars, I ask the group about that, and they say, well, compassionate and kind and confident and influential and caring and all good stuff. But that has the brain coming up with how we want to be, not how we don't want to be. So once people have a pretty good list of how they want to be, what they would teach or recommend to someone they love, then I say, okay, now in order to bring that to life, we've got to be able to imagine being that way. Because just making a nice list of words doesn't get us there. It shows us where we want to go, but it doesn't get us there. So who am I when I'm confident and kind? Who am I when I am influential and sensitive? Who am I when I am caring and resilient? So you kind of combine kind of yin and yang, the powerful and the graceful. What's my tone of voice like? What's my body language like? If I were to imagine being that way, what would that look like? And then the last step of the model is, all right, now that I've shifted to the top of the mind, I've got really clear how I want to be, I imagine what that looks like, now I notice the change. How do I feel differently at the end of this model than I did at the very beginning? So breathe, relax, ask, imagine, notice, spells brain. So it's a model that isn't that cool? I love that part. It not only talks about how the brain works and how to shift from one part of the brain to the other, but it also spells brain. Now, I encourage people to use the brain model like in situations where they've gotten an email and they're triggered, or a text message and they're triggered, or they're in traffic and they're triggered, or they see something on social media or cable news and get triggered. It's not something you use in the middle of a conversation. You can't say, wait a minute, I got to breathe and relax. They can't do that. But if you can start practicing it in those non-personal situations, that has you going into those situations already in the top of the mind, and you're much less likely to be triggered.
Wow. I mean, I say you could totally do it. I'm gonna say, oh, hold on, I need a 444.
That's cool. That's cool. And if you've got the kind of relationship that says, and here's the way you do that. You say, I really want to pay attention to what you're saying because I know it's really important. I just think I need a minute to make sure I'm kind of in a more receptive mode. Can you give me a minute? I've learned a way of getting there. People go, sure, no problem. So you can, if you've got the kind of relationship where you can do it, then that's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm a nerd when it comes to the brain. You can ask her.
Oh, cool.
But one of the things I think is interesting that you talk about is when people maybe are angry, and we're sort of trained, especially in sales, to cushion, probe, and respond. I hear you saying, so, X, Y, and Z sounds like we are literally ingrained to react that way with our customers. But you talk about a different method that I think is interesting. Share that with our listeners.
Yeah. To me, when we're wanting to create what I call a solution-focused conversation, we have to, number one, go into the conversation with a really clear sense of who we want to be. So we're not going in worried or anxious or frustrated to go, oh man, here's this client, they always did here, okay. And I put on this nice smile in it, but inside I'm going, rah, 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 rah. So we got to go in defining who we are. Number two, we always want to be reaching for what's important to that person first. And sometimes if we find ourselves in a conversation that isn't really going well, sometimes stopping and saying, okay, help me understand what's important to you here. What am I missing? Help me understand what you want me to know about this. Because in my humble opinion, that begins to give us the key to their cooperation. When we find out what's important to them, and then when we can blend it with what's important to us, we now find ourselves in a much more powerful situation. Now, the paraphrasing is great. We just want to make sure that it doesn't come across as a technique. I'm sure you don't do this, but other people might. If someone says, I'm feeling angry and frustrated, they say, I hear you're feeling angry and frustrated. People do not respond to that well because it feels like a trick or a technique. But if you say, hey, I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. It sounds like what's important to you and what you're saying is this and this and this. Did I get it right? That's a great question to ask. Because if they say yes, then you can go to the empathizing part. Hey, I can totally see how you'd see it that way. It totally makes sense. Whether it does or not to you, that's not the point. It does to them. And they need to know you get it. So that's the empathizing point. Then you use a magic word. And the magic word is always and, never but. You never want to say, well, yeah, I see what you're saying, but this house was only going to sell for this amount. We can't just, but will negate anything you put before it. But if you say, hey, boy, I can totally see how you see it that way, and it sounds like what you're wanting me to do is kind of put my expertise together so that you get the most from this property or something like that. So you're asking a future-oriented question that ties what's important to them with what's important to you, which is getting the sale and making the sale. And then you can begin to move to, okay, what does that look like? But it's a way of kind of going into a conversation clear about who we are, reaching for the best of them and what's important to them, making sure they know we get it, and then asking that future-oriented question.
I know, I love that. And, I get your email with your quotes that come out. And one of the quotes that I like kind of aligns with what you're talking about. And it was, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
That's right. We think, I know, we think when we say something, people get it. And they think when they say something to us that we get it. And it's very often, I do a lot of consulting with organizations and leadership teams and families and couples. I'd say 90% of the problem is misunderstanding. Someone says something, the other person heard it the wrong way or in another way, and we run with that interpretation. So that's where the kind of making sure we get clear about what's important to them and then let them know we get it. And then ask that question that blends what's important to them with what's important to us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by the way, for those of you every week I send out one of my favorite quotes to about 6,000 people, and it's free. And you can go to my website, billcrawfordphd.com, hit the subscribe button if you want to get one each week. And I also am putting a link to this week's video, since I have a YouTube channel that also I put this stuff on as well.
Yeah, his YouTube channel is great.
Really good.
You have so many great videos. And what I like about it is that they're short.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like very
6-7 minutes tops.
Yeah, so you can just quickly get a lot of them in, which is definitely.
You could just have a morning with Dr. Crawford.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I did have one person who really loved me said, Bill, I'm going to listen to one of your videos every day for an entire year.
Wow.
So I went, wow, that's pretty cool. And I've just counted up. I've now got 600 short videos, so you could actually almost do it for 2 years. Wow. But it's on everything from parenting to relationships to confidence to stress to anxiety to pretty much everything. So yeah, there's a lot of material. And it all uses the system the Life from the Top of the Mind system to talk about this. So it's all framed in neuroscience and how to activate that part of the brain.
So in our industry, there's been a lot of burnout. We have a lot of agents couple things going on. Many of them are working with buyers that are just don't want to get off the fence. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking of some of your videos in regards to the neuroscience of influence maybe would be helpful. And then the other thing I think that we have going on is fear. There's a lot of change in our industry right now. And that's coming to a head over the next few months with the way that we have contracts with buyers. Do you have any recommendations? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but like specifically for realtors on either influencing their buyers to make a decision and or just handle what comes out as stress when there's this unknown going on? Yeah.
I started my career as a drummer. I was a drummer before I became a speaker. But whether you're a drummer or a speaker, you have no job and that people are going to be paying you for. Your income, your ability to pay your bills comes from the next gig, which is the case with realtors as well. Mm-hmm. So what we got to recognize is two things. Number one, fear is a great response when you are in a dangerous situation that you need to react to without thinking. Someone's coming at you with a knife, someone's driving the wrong way on the freeway, someone's breaking into your house. That's what fear is for, because it throws you into that reactive brain and you stop thinking, you just react. Mm-hmm. When we get frightened based on things that we can't control, i.e. how the market's changing, whatever, we get thrown into that reactive brain and we get stuck down there. So it's kind of not just fight or flight, but it's freeze. And that feels scary as well, and it makes the situation seem worse, which doubles the fear, feels worse. We get caught in a cycle of trigger and stress and trigger and stress and trigger and stress. And it's all based on a chemical change, mostly adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol, triggered by the middle brain, throwing us into the lower brain. So if we'll start recognizing that fear is understandable, hey, it's not that I'm crazy for feeling frightened. It's just I'm not feeling frightened on purpose. It's really not working for me. It's not how I want to be defined, and I would not recommend it to someone I love. So it does not meet the 4 criteria. It's understandable. So the first thing I've got to do is shift from the frightened brain to the clear, confident, creative brain. Because my ability to deal with the unknown is going to come from this part of the brain. So the brain model and how to stay there is what that's all about. What you want to do with buyers is tap into their frustration, because that's probably what will motivate them to move off the fence. You can say something like, hey, I'm just curious, how long have you been trying to sell this home, and what is it like for you when time after time after time it doesn't just sell? That's got to be frustrating. They'll go, oh my God, you have no idea. That's just, and you say, wow, yeah. So it sounds like last thing you want to do is spend another 3-4 months doing that, right? And what you're wanting me to do is, Dean, bring all my skill and all my abilities to get you out of that situation. Are we on the same page? So see, what I've just done is I've partnered with what is their driver, rather than trying to convince them to sell the house. People do not like to be convinced. So when they sense you're convincing them, it feels like you're selling them or something, and they automatically push back. But when you can tap into what is driving them, and I can imagine with a homeowner, what's probably driving them is their frustration that the house isn't selling, or something.
Right.
But you want to find out what it is.
Okay.
And make sure that you're going, boy, that makes sense. So, and then you ask that future-oriented question. So it sounds like what you're wanting from me is to bring all of my expertise, all of my skills to making this happen as quickly as possible for the amount you're looking for. Is that fair to say? And they're going, yeah, man, that's what we want. So now you're kind of all moving in the same direction.
Okay. So maybe for a buyer, it would be whether they feel like they're throwing their money away on rent, or maybe their house is too small and their kids are all, crammed in none of
Right.
whatever the situation might be.
Yeah, for a buyer. And by the way, we're about to sell a house that we've been in for 20 years and move to Chicago.
Ooh.
Yeah, big deal.
Chicago. Wow.
And probably buy a duplex with our oldest son, Christopher, and his wife, because they're thinking of like babies and grandbabies and all that kind of stuff. And in this next spring area, boy, there's like going to be a whole lot of that whole buyer-seller kind of stuff going on.
So, Dr. Crawford, how are you feeling about this?
Well, I'm feeling fine. Because frankly, I just want to get rid of it and move on. Georgia, my wife, however, is Greek American. Money is important, and getting the right thing, and she's right. There's some things we need to flooring and painting and all that stuff that you do when you're selling a house. It definitely needs it. Really needs it. I just have no image of being around while it's doing it. Maybe I'm off doing a presentation or something. But she's a little bit more stressed about it because it's, she's the one that wants to do this. I kind of want to go, what's your cash offer? And we're out of here. But I know that's probably not a real good idea.
Go like this.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Well, if you need help finding a realtor, I'm sure we can help you out. We've got contacts in your area.
Well, this is a lot of notes that I took on our time together today. So I think if our listeners didn't get a few nuggets during our time with you, Dr. Crawford, then they're stuck somewhere.
Wrestling that lower brain.
They're not top of mind.
They're not top of mind if they didn't walk.
Well, at least now you have a mouth that spells brain that will get you out of it. So at least they're doing
Yes. Well, can you tell our listeners where they can find more information about your model and follow you on YouTube and all the things?
Sure. So you can go to my website, billcrawfordphd.com, or just Google Bill Crawford. I'll come up on the first page. There you can sign up for my newsletter, weekly newsletter. It's free. The YouTube channel is Bill Crawford, PhD YouTube. You can subscribe there. I generally post these things on LinkedIn too. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's just me kind of going around talking about. This is also on Audible for those folks who like to listen. I also have a book called How to Get Kids to Do What You Want.
We need that.
which is
with our
really all
teenagers.
about how to access the cooperative brain of your child. That's also on paperback and Audible. So there's that uses kind of the top of the mind system to do that. And that's one of the 8 books that I wrote. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I got to get that one. For sure.
With the buy now button on
I know.
Amazon.
I didn't know that was one of your books. So thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Well, we so appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This is so much fun for me. I get to kind of talk about what's important to me and hopefully share it with some folks and increase their top of the mind perspective.
Well,
Thank you, Dr.
I
Crawford.
appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. And good luck in Chicago.
Yeah.
Should be fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yes.
Okay,
All
take
right.
care.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Dr. Crawford.